What is happening, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. And a little bit of mine in this episode too. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. If you've been living under a rock and you haven't heard yet, we got some pretty big news for Classic recently, which we're not exactly used to, so the community is understandably freaking out. And the news that came on Wednesday told us that Classic will be playable via a demo at Blizzcon or at home to purchasers of a virtual ticket. And we also got told that there will be a dedicated panel to the game. So with that monumental news in mind, today we'll turn to the forums and break down piece by piece what the community thinks the news means for the project as it stands now and moving forward as well. After that, it's time for Calling Countdown, as I speak with a few listeners about Countdown to Classic corrections on Windfury and Warriors, art in World of Warcraft, and dueling and things of that nature. After that, it will be time for a quick bit of anger management, some memory lane stories, and then we'll have some cleanup, some show notes, and some shout-outs. Now, if you're enjoying these in-depth conversations that Countdown to Classic brings you on a regular basis, then please head on over to the show's Patreon page to see how you can help support Countdown to Classic continue to bring you more of the content that you're now so used to hearing on the show. If you want to hit me up with some feedback or submit a memory lane or an anger management of your own, you can always hit me up at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com as well. You can also support the show further by joining the show's amazing Discord, leaving a review on iTunes, and following the show on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. All the links for everything I've just mentioned are in the show notes each and every episode for you. If you can't get enough of me for some reason, then please do also check out my other podcast, The Cinephiles. That's SINNERFILES.com if you haven't already, for great comedic takes on all your favorite movies with myself and two amazing co-hosts over at that podcast. But with all that said, it's time to get to the news with Forum and Fauna. In Forum and Fauna, Countdown to Classic turns to the forums to hear what you, the listeners and the community, have been talking about with regards to the selected topic. And that topic today is, of course, the bombshell news that we got about 48 hours ago about a playable Classic demo being made available at BlizzCon and to purchasers of the virtual ticket to play at home. So, what were the exact details of that news? Well, as many of you now know, I'm a real stickler for the actual language used, and we don't want to start throwing wild interpretations out there that haven't been explicitly stated, so here's exactly what we were told in text over at Blizzard's website. This year, we're excited to announce that for the first time ever, BlizzCon virtual ticket holders will join BlizzCon attendees as the first people to play the World of Warcraft Classic demo we're creating for BlizzCon at home. Shortly after the BlizzCon opening ceremony on November 2nd, or around 1 p.m. PDT, players will be able to download the same in-development BlizzCon WoW Classic demo that will be playable on the show floor. Players will have a chance to explore and enjoy a limited questing experience through a pair of Classic early level zones, one Horde and one Alliance, and experience firsthand our recreation of the original Azeroth. Once the demo is live, you'll be able to play until 10 a.m. PST on November 8, giving BlizzCon attendees a chance to check it out again once they get back home. So in conjunction with that news, we were given a video announcement with Ian Hazakostas, WoW's game director, and J. Allen Brack, a production director, who I think it's fair to say is somewhat infamous with the WoW Classic community for both positive and negative reasons. This chat extrapolated on the information of the website with the following, and I'll just quickly read you a transcript of what they said rather than playing the whole 5-minute tape for you, when many of you may have heard it 10 times already. So here's what they said. Ian, but we're also going to be talking a bit about World of Warcraft Classic. I know a lot of you have been wondering where we're at with that project. It's been a few months since our last update. Well, at BlizzCon, we're going to have a whole lot to say. We'll have a panel digging into the philosophies that have guided us in recreating the Classic experience, as well as a lot of the technical challenges and a full update on where we stand with the project. And we're also really excited to announce that you're going to be able to jump in and try out WoW Classic for yourself as part of our floor demo. So you can either do the Mythic Dungeon Challenge, or you can get on, play Classic, and you can explore one of a couple of iconic zones, either an iconic Horde zone or an iconic Alliance zone. You can run around, slowly, on foot of course. You can plink away and auto-shoot Quillbore or Defias, depending on your preference. Spend a talent point here or there, and see where we are with the project. We can't wait to hear your feedback. Jay. We're very pleased and couldn't be more excited to announce that the WoW Classic demo that Ian just talked about will be playable by all holders of the virtual ticket in the comfort of their own homes. Our plan right now is for the WoW Classic servers to go live at the conclusion of opening ceremonies on November 2nd, and then everyone will be able to log in who has a virtual ticket. Ian. One question that I'm sure many of you have in particular is, well, what if I'm not around that weekend? What if I'm busy? What if I can't get to a computer? Well, we want to make sure that you can get a chance to explore the experience too. So we're going to keep our servers for the Classic demo up and accessible through at least November 8th. So, this amazing information begins to pull back the curtain a little bit, just a little bit, on a few massive questions that we've had regarding Classic. And we'll go through those questions one by one now. So, firstly, what does this mean for where Classic is at as a project? Well, we'll turn to the forums and, more specifically, the WoW Classic subreddit, and we'll start with user Grogalog, who says this: it's only 2 zones. And then we have user PorkSandwich9113, who says this: yeah, I know, but this means a large part of the back-end framework is complete. Imagine you're building a house. They have dug the basement, poured the foundation, laid the cinder block, put up the framing, and roughed in plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. Yeah, there's a lot missing, but the foundations and hard parts requiring the heavy machinery are all done. Yeah, maybe they have 1 or 2 rooms drywalled with floors laid and ready to go, but doing the rest is relatively easy now that the foundations are laid. Next we have user Infamous CRS, who says this: yes, but that means most of the behind-the-scenes or under-the-hood stuff is progressed if it's able to run a demo at all. Next we have user Brunel4070, who says this: but remember, it makes no sense for them to demo 13 zones. Just because 2 are only available to demo doesn't mean only 2 are complete. So now that we've heard from those users, let me just say this. I'm not a doctor, or a game dev for that matter. I know that might be a bit of a shock to some of you, but I would still interpret this as being positive news for the progress and state of the game. When we last heard from Blizzard in mid-June in the much-analysed Dev Watercooler statement, we basically got told that Blizzard got the proverbial engine to turn over and started the car. Yeah, it was a bit rusty and was a real fixer-upper, but they got it running after some trial and error. Speculation from many, including myself, was that this was old news, as it's virtually impossible that they would have announced Classic if they didn't work out prior to that announcement that they could actually get the old girl running. So, with it already being established that the game was working and how it was working in the water cooler, what does the availability of a demo tell us? Well, as the posters mention, it's more than likely this means that the client and its framework may be finalized, to the point that they're comfy showing it off to the ravenous fans, not only at BlizzCon, but sitting at home worldwide who buy a virtual ticket. They have a product ready for our consumption, our critique, our commentary. They're at a point with it that they're comfortable with showing off a highly anticipated project to the masses. This is nothing short of amazing to hear. We've closed the hood as the engine is running and everything is connected and it's all good. Now, it's time to finish the paint job and restore the exterior. For those being pessimistic that only 2 zones are being provided as the playground for the demo, I would suggest not to worry, as one of the posts I read out mentions. It doesn't mean that they've only finished 2 zones. It's a demo, a sample, a whetting of the appetite. If we'd heard we were getting a demo without the specifics of there being 2 zones, I would guess that many of us would have still speculated that it would have been quite constricted anyway. But part of the game is ready for our testing. That's the most important part. It's a nice little stress test of a week that will not only gauge how their servers hold up and perhaps reveal some bugs that may have been missed, but will also give Blizzard a slight insight into the level of interest in Classic to a certain extent by virtue of monitoring virtual ticket sales after the date of the announcement, given that they were available for a while before we knew this information. Some have claimed shenanigans on Blizzard's sales tactics in regard to this, but we'll address that soon. So, what does all of this mean for when we are getting Classic? We'll go back to the forums with user Twitch Bushies, who says this: yes, only 2 zones. It's a demo. They aren't rebuilding Azeroth throughout like they do in every expansion. All they have to do after the client is fully functional is enter numbers into a database. Knowing that the client is functional right now is the important part and a huge progress marker. Classic will be out by Q1 2019 easily, if not sooner. Next we have user Valtieri, who says this: I've said it before and I'll say it again. Open beta, spring 2019. Release, November 2019 for the 15th anniversary. Next we have user Gruntcake, who says this: they're not holding it back for a whole year just for some arbitrary date. It will be released mid-2019 to counter the traditional summer slump retail always suffers. Next we have user The Bear 242, who says this: if Blizzard continues their 2-year expansion cycle, late 2019 would put WoW Classic right between the release of BFA and a presumed 2020 expansion, which seems to me like the best way for Blizz to avoid competing with itself. At that rate, a 15-year anniversary release date makes sense just because it's better for marketing. Plus, the demo sounds like it'll only include 2 low-level zones. That's a very small percentage of the game overall, and devs may still need a full year to rebuild and test everything the way that they want to. But you know, hopefully I'm wrong, and we get a full release of WoW Classic in December 2018, but I'm not betting on it. Now, again, with all those posts out of the way, breaking news: I am not a game developer. But speculation is rife on what this huge news means for the release of the game, and I don't believe laymen are precluded from weighing in with hopeful guesswork. So, with that in mind, how much work do they have left to do? My guess there is this: a lot. I've no doubt that there's still a bunch to do with the Classic project in spite of the fact that we are getting a playable portion of the game. As one of the posters suggested though, it's easy from here. Just chuck in a few numbers and you're done. It's like you've drawn the picture, now you just got to colour it in. Well, even that may take a fair bit of time from a data entry and coding perspective. But again, not a game dev here. Many are now coming around to what was my best guess for a long time: summer 2019. I think I actually have mentioned a few times on social media something about June 4th, 2019 as my closest to the pin date for the past 6 months or so. I based that guess on a school holidays related basis. Recently, I said if we heard nothing substantial before BlizzCon, I would move that guess to late September 2019, somewhat arbitrarily, pushing back a few months waiting for an update. Well, Now that we have that update already, personally, I'm sticking to June 2019. There's been a lot of argument about 15-year anniversaries, and look, there are two camps on that one. One, significant dates and the power of marketing versus two, what is actually an arbitrary date and opportunity cost. I'm in the latter camp. I don't think Blizzard is particularly married to significant dates over the chance to push out a finished glossy product that can make money sooner. But how close are we to getting Classic if this demo is going to be available next month? Well, there's been a lot of chat about what order a demo generally comes in. Some say it goes demo, alpha, beta, finished product. Others say alpha, beta, demo, finished product. I'm not too sure, so I won't really comment heavily one way or the other. All I can say is I would be a little bit shocked if there isn't a Classic beta at all. So I'm guessing that is still to come. Some are suggesting that the beta phase may be skipped if we're now getting a polished demo. But I'd suggest that just because we're getting a demo doesn't necessarily mean it will be polished. They may be fine with us playing it at this stage, but that doesn't necessarily equate to it being anywhere near done. All I would say is that personally, I don't have fears that Classic will be released any time beyond 2019. I know John Stats mentioned 2020 plus as a guess, and many of us were skeptical of that guess due to his lack of connection with the project or Blizzard over the last 8 years. But it was still an opinion that obviously carried some weight at least due to his prior work with World of Warcraft. But with this demo coming, I want to hope that 2019 is now firmly on the cards, as I just can't see a demo being touted in the way in which it is if they're still 18 months away from pumping this thing out to us. Also, I couldn't imagine there being 3 straight BlizzCons by the time BlizzCon 2019 rolls around, featuring a still unreleased Classic focus. So that's my piece on it. Summer 2019. I'm sticking to my guns there. Now, moving on to another question that arose, and this was a bit of a sticking point for the community, being the price controversies about the virtual ticket. Now, we'll turn again to the forums and we'll start with user CPT4B, who says this. $50 for a demo of a game I've already spent hundreds of dollars and hours in? Where do I sign up? Then we go to user Baron of Bob, who says this. Really? Pay $50 for some streaming for a few days and to play a demo? And then we go to this post from user Sometimes I Worry, which had the title, The Whining About the BlizzCon Ticket Has to End. And they said this. Reddit is rampant about the topic of Classic demo being included with the virtual ticket. The biggest argument is that World of Warcraft, how can they charge me $50 to play the Classic demo? But they aren't. You pay $50 to virtually attend BlizzCon, not to play the demo, to attend BlizzCon. Now, it so happens that on top of all of this, you also get access to the Classic demo. So please, for the love of God, stop this complaining. Blizzard are actually giving us Classic content after all these years of obnoxious pleading. So show some appreciation instead. Thanks. Next we get user The Wizard of Foz, who says this. I've spent years defending the Classic community from people who say we just want a free ride, that private servers are pirate servers, played only by people who begrudge paying the subscription for real WoW. A significant portion of retail players believe that we'd rather be playing with them. We just can't afford $10 a month. But with all the people kicking off about this demo, I'm starting to think that they might not be all that wrong. Blizzard did not have to give us this demo. They could have done an on-stage scripted playthrough. It could have just been there for attendees, unavailable for the vast majority of us forced to stay at home. Instead, they throw us a bone and we throw them a tantrum. It's embarrassing. Sure, $50 is expensive, but like the original poster says, it was $50 with or without the demo. If you can't afford it, watch it on Twitch and help to get Classic trending. All crying about it does is continue to push the stereotype that vanilla WoW is for entitled pirates. Next we have user Herlin Rules, who says this. I would politely remind that while yes, there are a fair number throwing a hissy fit over this cost, please remember that this is just as usual an obscenely vocal minority. Don't let these keyboard warriors on 3 subreddits cast yet more negative light on what in a few more months we will see is a vast, soon-to-be community. Next we turn to user Drobu, who says this. I agree. I always get the virtual ticket to watch the panels I want to see. Anything beyond that is a bonus. Next we have user Whitespace Ninja, who says this. Bruh, we are paying for the classic demo and the virtual ticket is just a bonus. Next we have user Sometimes I Worry again in reply to the previous comment, who says this. I get if you maybe feel that way, but it literally is the other way around. But in reply to that, we get user Ready Trambler, who says this. It's in the eye of the beholder. Whatever your reason for buying the ticket is what you're paying for. I guarantee there will be plenty of people who buy the ticket just to play the demo. Next we have user An Enemy Stando, who says this. Actually, plenty of people are annoyed at the price of BlizzCon. They were annoyed with the old $30 price for a mediocre stream and forgettable in-game goodies, and they are definitely annoyed now. Next we have user Necropaw, who says this. Yeah, honestly, that's a lot of it, I think. There's a few too many people ignoring the fact that last year for $10 less, you got the mount/pet. Raising the price and then not giving the same level of reward is pretty annoying. I bought it last year. I don't really see myself doing the same this year. And finally, we have user Thorntonvere, who says this. I haven't seen anyone complain they're charging $50 for the demo, but yeah, that's dumb. It's not called the classic demo ticket. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time that they've ever let virtual ticket holders access a demo from BlizzCon, and I think it's really cool of them. Now, flowing on from all of those posts, and I apologize, I know there were a vast number of them, but this is a little bit of a prickly topic that's come up recently, so I thought I'd dive into it a fair bit. Now, I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, as this kind of chatter has slightly irked me a little bit too. Think about this. If you pay to go watch a football game, and they happen to throw in a hot dog as part of the deal, you did not pay $50 for a hot dog. The argument that this is hiding the classic demo behind a paywall and that this is typical money-hungry Blizzard doing nefarious things to bleed its customer base dry is just not one that I'm willing to pay too much attention to. I'm not afraid to criticize Blizzard or anyone really for that matter where it might be warranted, but the price is clearly for the virtual ticket. Yes, the price went up this year. Yes, you're not getting a permanent reward via a mount or a pet, but they've basically decided to change it up and push themselves to deliver something that they haven't tried before. You're getting a demo as a bonus on top of what a virtual ticket normally gives you. If you're not happy, don't buy it. People are whinging that the virtual ticket is bullshit and that you can just watch the footage on YouTube not long after it happens or wait for highlights at the end of the day. This is true, but people pay for the ticket as an official way to watch live. It's really not that far off what happens with watching live sport, like football. I pay to watch it live despite the fact that I can watch full game highlights for free on NFL.com or YouTube soon after the fact, because I find that I want a more enjoyable experience, and that comes with being there in the moment live in its entirety. You could call me a sucker, or someone who finds the cost more than worth it for the viewing experience that I enjoy. The concern over the frugal nature, so to speak, of the classic community may be a somewhat valid one if this has become a loud gripe. Are we the kind of people who are happy to keep playing for free on private servers once Classic is out, because we're all really just tight asses at heart? Again, I think the posts address that in saying no, that's a very loud minority. And to be honest, I am seeing just as many posts saying that people would pay that amount of money just for the classic demo, if not more. It's really just the notion of disposable income at its finest. Now, you can suggest that a fool and his money are soon parted. I would suggest that people are intelligent enough to weigh up a cost versus benefit analysis and determine what playing the classic demo means to them. It's not playing a game that is available for free already on private servers. It's the incoming official version of the game with the Blizz numbers implemented. And whatever they've done to maybe present it with a bit of what may euphemistically be put as a shine, if you will, we shall see. But I won't get much more into it than that, and we'll step off the half soapbox that I've constructed there. I just thought that was something that should be addressed. So stop your bitching. The classic demo does not cost $50. It's a bonus feature of another product. If you're not interested in what BlizzCon has to offer and you just want the demo, but don't feel that a game demo justifies $50, which I would agree with, then simply just don't buy it. No one has a gun to your head, and a beta may not be far off. Who knows? Anyway, with all that being said, now here's the good news that we know to end on. Classic exists. Classic is also not being cancelled. Blizzard hasn't forgotten about us, and Classic may actually come before 2020. We can start the giddy chat again about what Classic might be, what zones we're getting in the demo, and how we could make the demo a bit more fun for us. Going after Hogger, racing to level 10, things of that nature. There is also, I would think, plenty more to come. I think that this has been announced quite in advance of BlizzCon being a month away from the convention for a very specific reason. I think we are getting some really, really juicy morsels of information at BlizzCon regarding the game. They've lightly told us it's more than likely going to be talk of the trials and tribulations of putting Classic together and all of the challenges that they have had to overcome. But I think we're getting something really big, like a bombshell in the way of something like a release date. Now, I received a message from a pretty reputable source the other day, and this is not a leak in any way, shape or form, because the message said absolutely nothing outside of this. I was told this by this person. They said, I actually have insider information I wish I could share, haha, but everyone is going to find out at BlizzCon soon enough. Smiley face. So, look, that's hardly a leak because they tell us nothing, and I'm not trying to purport that I know something that you don't know or that everyone should start freaking out. But my guess from that message, as I said, from a person that I think is quite tapped in, is the following. I think we are getting a release date. I really do. I think this is the moment. I think we've waited a year. We haven't gotten a lot of information in the last 12 months. And I think that they've gotten a big hit of information out of the way with the, hey, you are getting a demo, which blew us all out of the water. And then I think we've got another big bit of news coming in terms of a firm release date. But that's just my guess. Really, when someone says, just you wait until BlizzCon, there's some plenty more coming. Look, it might be nothing. Who knows? But I like to dream, and that's just me. Now that we've spoken about the demo, I just want to quickly address another hot topic that popped up a couple of days ago after the demo news broke, and that was a new purported Classic leak, or leaks it may be better to say, considering the amount of air quotes information contained within. So a post was put up on a European official forum in German regarding a bunch of supposed leaks from an, again, air quotes, credible source. And those leaks mentioned the following: that Classic WoW is in a pre-alpha state. Mostly all the quests are done. They started working on dungeons and battlegrounds. 17 devs are working on the game, 2 former Nostarius devs for assuring authenticity as well. They don't think that there will be a long beta phase for Classic. The only changes are improved textures and spell effects, but still using the old models. Improved view distance and colorblind mode. Battle.net will have some restrictions on PvP servers, and that there are 8 servers per region, 4 PvP, 2 PvE, 1 RP PvP, and 1 RP PvE. There's no in-game shop at the start, and the sub to Classic will be included in Retail WoW, or you can pay less for Classic only. The launch of the game is coming in April to June 2019, and that there will be an announcement and gameplay at BlizzCon. So, on that last point, this supposed leak came out 2 days prior to the news about the demo, so that explains the timing of that last point. But anyway, taking this one with a giant grain of salt due to the relative anonymity of the poster and their unnamed sources, I spoke to former World of Warcraft developers Bo Bell, Kevin Jordan, and Alex Brazzi over the weekend, and I got the chance to actually ask Bo and Kevin about these leaks when I spoke to Alex that the news of the leaks hadn't come out yet, so I wasn't able to put the questions to him. But Bo and Kevin had a few things to say about it, and so I'll now play their comments for you in a couple of excerpts from these upcoming interviews on the show, and I'll start with this preview of the Bo Bell interview.
They've got the basics up and running probably, and now it's just fine tuning. Okay. So, my bigger question really is there going to be a PTR for it?
Well, that's the next question.
If so, when?
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit. So I'm not sure if you've heard, but again, in the last sort of like 24 hours, even though the post is a few days old now, there's been people talking about this purported leak that, you know, you absolutely take with a grain of salt whenever you hear something like this. And it's all completely unattributed, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to go into sort of the truth of what was said, but I do want to push you on two little sticking points from this supposed leak that came out. And one of the suggestions was that, number one, there's not going to be a long beta. Number one, there's not going to be a long beta phase with Classic. And number two, the launch is going to be somewhere in April to June, that window of 2019. So just dealing with the beta thing, firstly, you've talked about whether or not they're going to do PTRs. And let's say we get this demo for a week and that's all well and good. After that, would you envision that Classic would require a long regular beta phase, or it might actually be quite shorter?
So I will first just say they have to have a beta. That will definitely happen. Mm-hmm. How long it's going to be, I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, other than games like Fortnite and whatnot that are still in beta that have been released, right? Because that seems to be like the thing nowadays is like, oh, this is beta, because that way we can pretend like there's like we know about the bugs or whatever. But like, I don't think there's been any game that has had a longer beta than WoW ever did. That was like, you know, I mentioned at the very beginning of this, like Blizzard taught me so many horrible things about the game industry. That was one of them. Most game companies are like, oh yeah, beta's a week long. At Blizzard, it was like 10 months or something. It was like this ridiculous amount of time. I think that honestly, I probably would agree with the leak. I don't think it's going to be a long, and I think it's because they don't need it to be long. They don't need to test server stability. They have that down, right? They don't need to test, balance issues. Because again, it's not that they have it down, but if they've got the numbers, if they've been able to reverse engineer those numbers and pull them out, you know, they're going to do everything they can not to tweak those, right? They want to give you the authentic experience. So they're not going to be playing with them. They're just going to try to get them back to what they were originally, right? There's a lot of things that go into the beta tests that they don't need to test. So yeah, I don't think it'll be long at all. I think it'll probably be a couple of months, maybe 3 at the most. And even then, the other thing that they learned with the original open beta was that if anything, if it goes longer, it's only going to be just to drive hype. But I don't even know if they want to do that at this point, because why would they? The hype's already there. Yep. So yeah. If anything, it's going to be just to make sure that everything's working correctly, quote.
Right.
So it's not going to be a true beta like most games have. They don't need player feedback on, is this class fun? Anything like that.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter. And by the way, people are going to bitch about it anyway.
They absolutely will. Well, focusing on the second part of my question in terms of release date, when this, again, supposed leak says somewhere in the window of April to June of 2019 is when launch is supposedly coming. again, knowing that we've got a small portion of the game ready to be presented to the world and played, do you think that that is a likely or achievable window of time?
From the limited information I would say it's possible. I'm not going to say likely. The only reason I don't want to say likely is because I don't have any information other than what you have. Reddit has.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Like I said, like the thing, like I totally agreed with John. I was thinking 2020, yeah, maybe 2021. Just based on everything I'd heard up until that point and knowing game development and knowing what they were going to have to go through. Like, the game I'm working on currently has changed dramatically from the game it was when I started just a year ago. And we do not have those files. We can't go back in time a year and replay those old versions of the game. We have builds that we can play, but we don't have the original code and all that stuff. It's all overwritten. That's just the nature of the beast. That's what happens. You have to move quickly. And there aren't custodians going, we need to save this for, posterity's sake or whatever.
Right.
Like that just like that's on no one's mind. Maybe they're doing that now at Blizzard, but definitely back then, no way. But yeah, I think at this point, I mean, that announcement that they're going to be, at BlizzCon with it, that threw a giant monkey, wrench in the works. So yeah, I don't know, man.
All right.
I gotta say, I'm actually hoping June, and I'm also really hoping the other thing too is that, it comes with a retail sub. That would be nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, we might as well just lightly address a few of the things in this league now that you seem to have a fair few takes on it. But in regards to the sub, I mean, do you? I know it's too hard to say because you haven't been there for so long. But what were your thoughts as a fan in terms of the proposal that you might be included in the retail sub, but perhaps have the option to pay a little bit less for classic only?
I think that's an awesome idea, actually.
Do you think it's likely something Blizzard would consider?
Oh, totally. I'm honestly, I was shocked, that they gave out StarCraft for free. The original StarCraft, that is.
Right.
When they redid it, cause they easily could have got people to pay for it. And the difference between that and WoW is server cost, right? WoW has a definite upkeep cost that StarCraft doesn't. And so with that being the case, like it requires some kind of constant influx of income for them. Be that a subscription or as games do nowadays, microtransactions all the time or whatever. But it's got, it's got to have income to justify it. Those servers, not cheap. I remember when I was in QA, excuse me.
Go ahead.
When I was on QA, we were still working with the original BattleNet, and they were changing it around, for Diablo 2, the interface for it and stuff. And they announced that they were going to start putting banner ads in that lobby for Diablo 2 and StarCraft and all that stuff. And there was this huge fan backlash, right? Because, there's going to be ads now. And it was just a single banner ad at the top of the screen in the lobby that you're in, that you don't even notice. But everyone freaked out. And the kicker was that, like, I finally asked, around higher ups, like, why do we have to do that? Cause again, I'm totally green at this point. I'm in QA. Like, why do we have to do that? And the answer was, well, because, we have these servers that are running BattleNet and they cost like $50,000 a month each. Like, and we're not making any money off of them. Like, we're just giving them out to people for free. And that was back in like 1998. at 50 grand a month, and that was just for the few servers they had. And now looking at it in 2018 with God knows how many they have for Hearthstone, Overwatch, WoW, Heroes of the Storm, all that crap. Like, they've got to be paying probably millions of dollars monthly or something ridiculous just for their servers. So yeah, there's going to be a cost. 100%. And I'm okay with that. And, and I think it's even better if they allow people to pay less to do just Classic, because there's obviously some demand there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
The one thing I would say from the leak that I'm not sure if I agree with is the server.
The servers,
numbers.
Yeah, that's the one everyone's picking on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can see it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I didn't play Nostralis or anything. I never played on a private server, so I don't know. Are a lot of those PvP?
Well, it's one of those things.
You know?
They broke it down, apparently. It says 8 servers per region, 4 being PvP, 2 PvE, 1 RP PvP, and 1 RP PvE.
Right.
And the only thing is, don't get me wrong, as I said, it was originally put up in German, I believe, and some things might be lost to translation. Right. But, however, whatever 8 servers per region means, but, let's say it was 8 North American servers. I mean, I'm presuming that even if you were to go, let's say you went ballistic and said, well, if they do Blizz-like numbers, and I don't know, 5,000 per server, well, now what? There's only 40,000 people in North America plan to play Classic. Let's say they go nuts and it's 10,000 per server, and now it's what? There's only 80,000 people in North America planning to play a Classic according to Blizzard. Like, it doesn't add up to me.
Right, yeah. So for me, so the total number, I'm not super surprised by the low number. WoW launched only with 20 servers.
Right.
And they went to capacity almost immediately. They scrambled really hard to get more as fast as they could. But even then, I looking at 8 right now, I think that's a little on the low side. I'd say at least 10, but also the bigger one for me is the split. 4 PvP servers.
Right.
Half of them are PvP. And I'm like, I don't know. If I remember correctly back then,
it would have been the other way around.
It was mostly PvE. But then again, I mean, maybe, they're going to do a ton of market research on this, right?
Yep. Well, I can
really
tell you,
try to find out who it is.
Just from going based off of what, the Countdown to Classic, the podcast is a community-driven show. I talk to a lot of people from the community. They call in, they tell me their thoughts and dreams and hopes about Classic. The vast majority of people who call in are all in on PvP. So if that's anything to take with it, how the market has developed over the years, which obviously is in contrast to how Blizzard initially thought World of Warcraft would go, when you say that you guys sort of weren't even thinking that PvP might be in the game at all. And now over the years, people absolutely love it. So maybe that's the case.
Yeah. The stuff that I've read, people talk about PvP a lot, like on our Classic WoW and whatnot. But generally, they're talking about the early battlegrounds, or the infamous Honor Point rollout with Terran Mill and South Shore, right? I don't see a lot of talk about PvP servers specifically. I could be totally wrong. For all I know, that there's more demand for that from this specific community than I'm seeing, but back then it was definitely, the split was way more PvE.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends that, just real quick. I had a lot of friends that they wanted to start. They're like, oh, I'm totally doing PvP. And within like a month, they're like, what PvE server are you on? I'm going to come join that one. So that was pretty common.
You bring up a great point, because really we have to distinguish the kind of people who are the hardcore fans who obviously listen to World of Warcraft Classic podcasts in this kind of detail, a year before the game's release or more. These are the real, we're talking about like the 1%ers, the people who are really dedicated to the game. The vast majority of consumers are going to be much, much, much more casual fans. And they might, and even though the people listening to this might gravitate towards PvP because they might have played on private servers, and private servers are mainly PvP based. The vast majority of people who buy into Classic may very well be PvE based. So maybe that's why my assumption is a little bit skewed in terms of the desire for PvP, but who knows? One more thing I'd like to question you about is, whilst we're just we might as well go through almost everything with the leak. What do you think about when they say something like, 17 devs are on the WoW Classic team? Does that sound like a pretty fair number, or you would have thought higher or lower?
That sounds about perfect, actually. Yeah, they don't, pretty much everyone on that team is probably going to be programmers, maybe a couple of tech artists. They don't need designers, really. They may have one or two, but even then they could probably just cherry pick from other teams. Just to kind of hey, can you make sure these numbers are right, kind of thing. And not so much a situation of cause again, they're not trying to make right? They're just trying to recreate one.
Yep.
With all the information that they have. They don't need any quest designers. They probably, if they're at the stage where they're at right now, I'm pretty sure they've reverse engineered most of it. They've been able to crack it open. And once they can do that, they can analyze a lot of information. Mob placement, spawn times. If they can get into those databases, they can just pull it all out, and once they have the information, they can just recreate it. So they don't need a ton of people to do this. One thing I keep seeing get brought up is the fact that people are there's 2 people from Nostralius on the team. Okay. Again, I think that, as you pointed out, it was originally a German translation. I have a funny feeling that there's 2 people from Nostralius that are consultants or contractors.
Right.
They're not, I don't think they're full-time employees. And I don't think that they're part of that 17. It's probably, 17 plus those 2 as consultants.
Right. But you've heard that there are people from Nostarius, involved with Blizzard.
I read that whole leak, today, actually.
Right.
I was going through Classic WoW today before.
Sorry, but I mean, prior to reading the leak, had you heard that anyone from Nostarius was involved with Blizzard?
No.
Oh, okay.
I hadn't heard it. I had no idea how many people were on the team. I'm going purely off that link.
Yeah, gotcha.
So
I guess the last point from the leak that we'll just cover is when they say that Classic WoW is currently in a pre-alpha state. Mostly all the quests are done. They started working on Dungeons and Battlegrounds. Now, again, lost in translation. I'm not sure if they're saying they started the Classic project by working on Dungeons and Battlegrounds, or if they're saying they have now started working on the Dungeons and the Battlegrounds. But what would you say about, the suggestion that if we're getting a demo coming up soon, it's in a pre-alpha state with mostly the quests done?
I would say that's probably accurate. Like I was saying before, once they've cracked the code, right? They've done the reverse engineering. They've pulled out the data. Cause that's the problem, right? Is the first problem that they have to overcome is pulling the data out, getting it in its original form. And then they have to, it's literally a translation, because the WoW code base today is not the WoW code base that shipped, right? They need to translate it. And that's what, they're not going to ship it in, vanilla form, because that code base is dead. So they have to translate it over into the new one and get it working. And it sounds like they've cracked the code. They've pulled all the data out. They've got it. It's just the matter of getting it over into a playable condition with a new code base. And that lines up perfectly with the way that I would do it, which is start with the open world, right? Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. Do those first, get them populated with mobs and quests. Because again, it's just data. They just have to plug it in, but there's that translation. That's the problematic part. And then move on to the instances. And battlegrounds and dungeons and raids are all instances.
Right.
They're all separately handled. So that makes perfect sense to me. Like that's where they would be. And the only reason they probably call it a pre-alpha state is because of that, is because they probably did a loose translation of the data into the new code base, and they've run around and they've played it, and their QA has, run around and played on it, and there's no glaring problems, right?
Okay.
It all seems to be working just fine.
Yeah, which is why they'd obviously be comfortable presenting it to the world, I guess.
Right. And that's why you call it pre-alpha, though, is because, it seems to be working fine.
Right. Now, with that one done, we'll turn to the Kevin Jordan interview and hear what Kevin had to say about it. I don't expect you to necessarily have heard. I'm not sure how closely you follow any of this classic news, but there was also just in the last 24 hours, kind of, even though it's a post from a few days ago, something that got the community buzzing was a purported leak. And we take all of these always with a huge grain of salt, obviously, when it's completely unattributed and just, I know someone in the know and here's what they said. Problem is, well, not problem, but a lot of the things they said seem to make a lot of sense to the community. And I put a lot of these to Bo. And Bo said, you know what, a lot of this kind of is on point and makes sense, except for one particularly noteworthy one that seems a bit odd. But anyway, I'll just put a couple of these points to you and just see if they sound like a possibility or complete horseshit. Now, they mentioned that they're in their leak, they're saying Classic will not have a long beta phase. Would that sound like something that could be possible from your perspective?
No. The only situation I can imagine where it doesn't have a long beta phase is if everything just works perfectly, right? But Blizzard's track record is when it's ready, and if it hits the ground and there's a ton of problems, they're going to take as much time as it needs to fix those problems, get it ready. And so, if they're literally just sitting on a perfect product, then they'll go ahead and advance it, to the next stage ASAP. But I cannot imagine it's going to be a perfect thing when they put it up. So it wasn't a perfect thing back then. So yeah, in terms of like bug count, like we released with bugs, obviously.
Yep.
And what's going to be their threshold for releasing the re-release, as far as bug count. So who knows? But yeah, I can't imagine it goes so smoothly that it's just, 2 weeks and we're ready.
Right. Now, they also mentioned that the size of the current team working on the game is 17 developers. Would that sound too big, too small, or just about right?
I'm sorry, what? How big?
They said 17 is the number of staff currently working on the game.
Yeah, it's hard to know without knowing what the technical things are. I'm trying to remember how big our programming staff was, but it also, it helps answer the question of, well, how many artists do they have on it? How many level designers that are polishing a few things here and there? Are there any UI people working on polishing things here and there? Or is it just all technical issues that they're trying to work out? So, yeah, and I also just don't know what the scope of what they're trying to accomplish is. Is it really just re-releasing the old thing, or is it polishing it up, putting it out? Is it adding that extra layer that's going to require design, code, and potentially art, UI, and all those things? So, yeah, it's tough to answer without knowing what their intention is.
One last one. They pinpoint the window of time of release being somewhere between April to June of 2019. Now, I've already asked you about this, but if I was to say that we now know that we're getting this demo, albeit, as a very limited one, does April to June of 2019 seem like a completely unrealistic window of time for release? Or would you say, you know what, maybe actually if we're getting a demo now, it's possible?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's unrealistic. Yeah, I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay.
I mean, Blizzard traditionally likes to announce things on the shorter side from, releases, right? Like, rather than, hey, everybody, we're going to do something amazing in 5 years, right? Like,
yeah.
As soon as they think of the idea, they run to the press. Like, that's not their style at all. Mm-hmm. So they're very coordinated in their sort of hype machine, like there's a distance between when you trickle out info until the next one in order to properly develop the hype wave, right? So, and they're very practiced at that. So, and it's much more short term than it is like long term.
So with all those takes done, let me give you a quick summary of my thoughts on this. Do I think it's legit? No. Do I think they make some possibly plausible points? Yes. Time will tell how right this supposed leak was, but I guess it's right so far with the call on the announcement of the Classic WoW panel and gameplay being available at BlizzCon. But most of us have been making that educated guess for a little while now. The server numbers do remain the oddity for me, as well as the bulk of the community, so we'll see what comes of that. Whatever Blizzard does wind up doing server-wise is going to be fascinating anyway to see if they flip things around and put more of a focus on PvP or not, given the popularity of PvP private servers amongst the Classic community that had pushed for the game to be made for so long. But some of you might be rubbed slightly the wrong way by the show discussing these leaks and giving any kind of credence whatsoever to what they say. Let me just say that basically I feel that it's fine to talk about it just in a hypothetical sense. We know that it's, more than likely horseshit, but, it's just something fun to discuss while obviously we're waiting for more news. So I hope you don't mind and do forgive me if I just threw a little bit of conjecture out there on that one. So, with all that analysis out of the way, now it's time to hear from the listeners about all things vanilla World of Warcraft in today's Calling Countdown. All right, we've got another caller on the line now, and who are we speaking with, and where in the world are you calling from?
I go by the username Fred Monroe, and I am calling from the East Coast of the United States.
Yes, Fred Monroe, thank you so much for calling in. Now, I'm so glad to have spoken to you. We've been trying to tee this up over the last week or so, and I must admit, you're one of very, very few people that I've sort of unofficially stood up on a call. We were supposed to do this last week, and I was moving house, and a million things were happening, and I had to apologize, but thankfully here we are today. And the reason that I was sort of quite keen to get to your call is that you've been really active on the Classic WoW subreddit recently in replies to some of the latest episodes that I've put up, and you've put forth some really amazing information that clarifies a number of points that have come up in some of the latest episodes, being more poignantly the Shaman episode and the most recent one being the patch history with Daryl Marky Mark. And perhaps we'll start with, I just want to preface something, obviously, with relation to the feedback you put in. It was amazing work, really, really amazing factual analysis of some of the numbers that get crunched when we talk about the game. And I really do invite absolutely everyone and anyone to clarify or correct anything that any of the guests or myself say on the show. I don't think many World of Warcraft players really put themselves out there as being infallible at any point in time. And if you feel that something has been wrong, please write into the show and let me know. And if the guests hear it and they want to fire back with something, they're more than welcome to as well. But it's obviously all about getting the right information out there. And if you feel that something perhaps wasn't said quite right, well, this is the chance, like Fred Monroe is going to obviously do. And he did so incredibly politely, which is the right way to do it. And so I'd throw it out to you, Fred Monroe. Let's start with the Shaman episode. Now, you took a notice of some of the points about Windfury. Is that right?
Hi, well, thank you for having me on, first of all. So just some quick clarification about Windfury. So what happened was actually in Vanilla WoW, at some point, Windfury could proc off itself. The guests that shown up so were a bit unclear when this changed. They suggested, maybe it was TBC when there was the internal cooldown added. Actually, what happened was in patch 1.4, there was a big change to the way that on-hit effects worked. So this included things like Windfury, included things like, sword spec, or our favorite, trash blade if you're a rogue, that sort of thing. They used to be able to proc off itself. But as of 1.4, there's a big change, and so that could no longer happen. But again, if you look at a pre-1.4 world, the expected hits that a shaman would get with a Windfury, as opposed to 1.4 hits per hit, because 40% chance to attack twice, was actually closer to 1.66, because every time you Windfuried, each of those 2 hits had a chance themselves of proccing 2 more Windfury hits, and so on. It's a huge increase in damage. If you can actually do that, of those of 1.4 you can't. So I just wanted to correct that real quick, just provide some clarification on that point. It affected Windfury, but also affected other on-hit effects to the shaman.
No, that's fantastic. And thanks so much for that clarification. It was definitely something that made me scratch my head, because a couple of people got back to me and said, wasn't that in Burning Crusade, or the proc off the proc? And I couldn't quite work it out. So thanks so much for that. Now, was there, sorry, go for it.
Sorry,
yeah.
Just interrupt, sorry for a second. On the proc of the proc, so what happened, in the Burning Crusade change is that there's an internal cooldown added, because in Burning Crusade, what happened was both, a shaman could dual wield. That was the big change. And so that led to a situation where, your main had Windfury, and then your offhand Windfury right afterwards. So there's an internal cooldown added so that couldn't happen. But as of vanilla, even after 1.4, you could say attack and have that Windfury, and then immediately attack afterwards with a Storm Strike and have that Windfury with no internal cooldown. So just to be clear, that's the change to TBC, where like that, what I just described right there, that couldn't happen as of TBC.
Excellent. Okay. And then was there anything else out of interest that you might not have mentioned that sort of grabbed you in that shaman episode that you thought was worthy of a bit more exploration, or perhaps another point of clarification?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I would say the first thing is around the 1:14:30 second mark. They're discussing how, well, you can't really use Storm Strike because of the debuff limit prior to the 1.7 change that raised the debuff limit. Well, it's not really a big deal, because actually, shamans using the 1.12 talents don't actually use Storm Strike in raid pretty much ever, at least until AQ or Nax. And the reason for that is you want to save your mana actually for, as weird as it sounds, rank 1 Frost Shocks. Because what you spec is you spec Elemental Devastation, which increases your crit chance by 9% after you crit with a spell. And so long as you have Frost Mages, they have Winter's Chill on a raid boss as one of the 8 debuffs or even one of the 16 debuffs, which increases the chance to get a critical strike with a frost spell against that target. And so what you do is you basically conserve your mana so you can use rank 1 Frost Shocks to try to farm this 9% increase to your melee critical strike chance. So you're not actually really even using Storm Strikes in the first place, because you just don't really have the mana for it. It's more mana efficient to use rank 1 Frost Shocks for the damage. And then another thing to mention, I guess, is that at 1:30 they're making recommendations for weapons, and they say Wave Slicer is a good weapon. You're actually best off getting Dreadforge Retaliator, which drops from BRDs. You can get that right away. Or, everyone's favorite, the Arcanite Reaper. And then if you're not an Orc, because those are both axes, you can get Bone Crusher, also from Dire Maul. And then I guess the final point I have about the episode is at 1:43, they're sort of wishy-washy about which is better for PvP, which is Elemental Enhancement. Enhancement is actually awful for PvP, especially in a sort of arranged PvP, because they basically run out of mana very quickly. They don't really have a good purpose in the raid composition, especially like say in a very organized Warsong Gulch. But all the top PvP groups on Horde side, you see this on Elysium, on Astarius, on Lightbringer, all the major servers. They'll always bring 1 or 2 Elemental Shamans, which is a 30-0-21 build for Nature Swiftness. So Elementals is actually viable in like super legit arranged PvP, and Enhancement is terrible. Just to clear the air about that.
No, you have cleared that air fantastically well, and that was such an amazing response. Thank you so much for that. Now, I won't go into detail, but I'll assure the listeners that knowing what you do, you are an incredibly intelligent listener. So thanks so much for that. The only point that I have to chip you on and sort of give you one little demerit point that have you fall short of the 100% on that test is when you mentioned Arcanite Reaper, you didn't break character and throw in a big Arcanite Reaper. Ho!
Yeah, I mean, Illegal Danish, obviously, huge fan. I hope they come back when, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll really see. It'll be interesting to see what sort of machinima we get with, Return to Classic.
Absolutely. Okay. So does that pretty much clear it up for the Shamans episode?
Oh yeah, that's it for the shaman episode. Just very, very minor points.
All right. Now, just out of interest, I'll ask this because you mentioned to me before we started recording that your main areas of expertise were with shamans and also with, what was the other class? Remind me.
With hunters.
Hunters,
yeah, so,
that's right.
So when I played I actually played vanilla, and I played enhancement shaman, and back then people didn't know what was really going on, at least on my server. Obviously, there are other servers where people were clearing KT. My server is Girabashi. It's like a West Coast US server. I think West Coast US was not exactly the cream of the crop of the WoW players. So I had a great time, but, so then I played on the Starius, and I also played on Elysium, and I played enhancement on the Starius, and then switched to Hunter for Elysium because I was tired of punishing myself. Although I guess I kind of did punish myself anyway, but it's definitely a huge step up from enhancement in any case. So it was great.
Did you high level raid with your shaman?
No, so I actually was able to get a raid group. So I was one of the first on both the servers when they came out. I was able to put a lot of time into the game, and I was, very closely following the leveling guide. So actually, it just helps to be one of the first level 60s who's ready to raid and has like their pre-bis gear. Even the enhancement shaman, if a guild's having trouble just getting 40 players to come to a raid, and the first 10 raids when they're still starting out, this enhancement shaman comes every time, it's hard for them to just kick the guy out afterwards, So I think that's the trick. That's the recommendation I'd make to anyone who's trying to play enhancement shaman in a serious guild, is be very fast to level and be one of the first players they get and be well geared. And then once you're sort of in there, then you're in there,
No worries. I was trying to help you out a little bit and buff your resume somewhat so that, if people go like, oh, fuck this Fred Monroe guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And then you could have said, hey man, I rated Nax, blah, blah, blah. But then I was sort of secretly hoping that you'd also say, if I was like, tell us about your experience with, Shaman, you'd be like, oh yeah, I took one to level 13 once.
So regarding enhancement, here's the one resume buff I have, which is, on Instarius, I got the server first, Crown of Destruction, which is the enhancement shaman bis game helmet, drops from Ragnaros. I got the patch that AV comes out, which is when they did so they changed the automation in Molten Core. It actually is pretty bad until the AB patch. And then when the AB patch comes out, there's a whole slew of new items, and that's one of them.
Very nice.
That's just for that. And then for my resume on Hunter, on Elysium, I was actually the Hunter class lead for, one of the 10 guilds that cleared BWL the first week. And then that guild eventually ended up clearing Nax, although I stopped playing a bit before that. But yeah, it was a pretty serious guild as well. So that's my resume buff there.
Very nice, very nice. Now, you don't know this, but you've actually just inadvertently volunteered to come on a future Countdown to Classic episode as my enhancement shaman expert when I do that episode. So
I'd love to do that.
Thanks very much. I'll say it in advance.
No, thank you for the invite. Yeah, I'd love to come on.
That's what I do on the show. I just drag people in a room and go, hey, you get in here, talk about World of Warcraft. And they're, all right, what's going on?
Hey, people like talking about World of Warcraft, they like talking about World of Warcraft. It's that simple.
That's right. We give the people what they want. So moving on, you said that another few points came sort of to mind when you were listening to the latest episode with Daryl Marky Mark, all about patch history. And a few things you jotted down, and you began with an interesting point to me, where, and Mark did say this a couple of times, and I think you're suggesting that he's not wrong, but a little bit of an extrapolation would be a better thing to do, when he said that, warriors were fantastic in 1.1, and you said that's a little bit too simplistic because there's much more to it than that. So what did you mean by that?
Right. So he's absolutely correct that warriors are in fact the best tanks 1.1, and they're still great in 1.1 too. However, warriors, especially in 1.12, they fulfill more than just the tank role. They're also known in 1.12 sort of notoriously to be the strongest DPS. And as of 1.1, they are pretty bad actually at DPSing. So they got this major overhaul in 1.6, which you touched on a little bit during the interview. But I actually posted on my Reddit post here the old talent, but you could see that their old talents were actually terrible. So Bloodthirst just wasn't even part of your rotation. How Bloodthirst used to work, as opposed to, this activate, do a bunch of damage spell that it is in 1.12. It was just this bonus damage where after you killed something, your next attack would have 100% bonus damage. Obviously, that's useless in any sort of, raid environment. And then they also didn't have any sort of benefit towards dual wielding. They didn't have the flat 5% increase per talent point, so up to 25% bonus damage with their offhand weapon, which is obviously a huge deal for damage. This is compounded by the fact that in 1.8 is when the dual wield change happened. So just a quick sort of thing on how hit works in the game. Basically, you have against an enemy that's 3 levels higher than you, level 63 enemy, a boss. If you have no bonus weapon skill, you're going to have 9% base miss chance. And then if you're dual wielding, there's an extra plus 15% miss chance for a total 24% miss chance. In 1.8, what they did is they allowed you to mitigate that 15% miss chance from dual wielding. So like, let's say that, so prior to 1.8, if you had like 15% hit, well, 6 of it would be wasted. You would meet the 9 base, but the extra 6 wouldn't do anything to counteract the 15 extra miss from dual wielding. But after 1.8, that was changed to allow that extra hit to mitigate that extra minus 15% for dual wielding. And that's a big deal because if anyone who's played a warrior knows, missing feels really, really bad. You miss, you don't generate rage, it's over. You're not rolling in damage or anything like that, which is why actually like stacking plus hit is really, really important on warriors, more so than even say on a rogue, because if a rogue misses a white attack, no big deal. Warrior misses it, they don't get their energy, so they can't, do anything. So prior to 1.6, and the talent changes, warriors couldn't really DPS that well at all, and it wasn't until 1.8, with the dual wield change that dual wield warriors are able to do anything. And of course, dual wield warriors is the highest, that's the, in the 1.12, that's the cream of the crop. That's the top DPS, and dual wield warrior was terrible in 1.11, or 1.1. So that's, that's all, that's on the warrior note. And then also there's this whole mention of how the classes are so much, worse balanced in 1.1 compared to 1.12. Well, we already touched on how the very top DPS in 1.12, which is considered extremely unbalanced, was actually much weaker in 1.1. But there's other things to note. So for example, hunters, which I know a bit about, they're actually stronger in 1.1, just not even like on a relative scale relative to the other characters, just on an absolute scale. Like the 1.1 hunter is stronger than 1.12 hunter going against each other, even with the talent rework. So the talent rework, as I mentioned in this post, sort of increases the pet's damage by 10% and also gives the hunter 5% damage to multi-shot and 5% chance for an increased attack speed proc on aspects of the hawk. However, it comes at a steep price. So in 1.9, there was a change to pet's damage. So, everyone's favorite pet, the wolf Lupos, he does shadow damage. This is sort of notorious in private servers. But this was changed in 1.9, the AQ patch, and he no longer did shadow damage. But this is a big deal because in 1.1, before he's been changed, he's still doing shadow damage. He's going to do 110% damage to any mobby attacks, any mob in a raid, because he ignores armor, so he's doing 100% damage. And then with the Curse of Shadows, which increases shadow damage by 10%, Lupus is going to do 110% damage. And then in the 1.1 talents, you get another 10% from talents, so he's doing 121% damage. Compare that with the damage he does in 1.12, where he does normal damage. Now instead of doing 110% damage base, he's doing 75% damage, because, when you have your Sunder Armor and your Fairy Fire on an enemy, and your Curse of Recklessness, the boss will now have 25% mitigation from armor. So instead of doing, 100% damage, he'll do 75% because that's 25% mitigation from armor. And then he does do 20% from talents as opposed to 10%. So that is an improvement, but still that final number is only 90% damage compared to 121% in 1.1. So, that's a huge increase in damage between 1.1 and 1.12, where the pet's doing 33% additional damage in 1.1 as opposed to 1.12. And then as for the hunter himself, the way, in 1.10, 1.10, you talked about how in 1.8 there's normalization to melee. Well, in 1.10, there's normalization to ranged attack. And ranged attack was normalized to a 2.8 speed. But this is a big problem because the hunter's best weapons are all much slower than 2.8 attack speed. So it's 3.2 attack speed is their first weapon, which drops from Lord Blackrock Spire. Then you get 3.3 attack speed, another blue crossbow, which you get as an AV rep reward. And then the best weapon they basically have for the entire game, unless you count Kel'Thuzad drops, and I certainly don't for the best weapons. is a 3.4 speed. So normalizing a 3.4 attack speed weapon to 2.8 is a huge nerf to its damage. And what's normalized is aim shot and multi-shot. So those attacks do way less damage as of 1.10, 1.10 as compared to how they do earlier than that. Sorry, I just kind of spoke for a long time there, but that's a lot of the thoughts.
Holy shit. Did anyone get the license plate of that fucking bus of knowledge that just bowled me over? That was amazing. Very well done. I can tell the listeners, again, without giving away too much, knowing what you're going to be doing for a profession, I can tell you are going to be exceedingly fucking good at it. So that was unbelievable. Now, did you take a breath? I just didn't want to get in the way of that unstoppable force. That was great.
Well, thanks for the compliments. Yeah, I really hope I spoke clearly enough that people can understand that. Maybe play it back a few times. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so those are the main things. And then the last thing to talk about is normalization.
Well, I'll just before we get there, I do definitely want to talk about normalization, but and please, for God's sakes, don't apologize. Every second of everything you've just said was absolutely amazing, and I've already convinced myself I definitely want to get you back on the show in the future. But you mentioned one very small point which did intrigue me in your reply, and for all the listeners, if you're looking for a bit more information, or if you're sort of, rather than having to play back this call again multiple times if you're a bit unsure, some of this stuff is in writing over at the Classic WoW subreddit as a response to my latest episode number 71 with Daryl Marky Mark, and you can find everything, a lot of the points that Fred Munro has said in text over there. So do have a good read of that and get back to him if you're liking what he's saying and picking up what he's putting down. Now, one thing you mentioned, which made me raise an eyebrow, was your very quick comment about paladins, because you mentioned, as you've just gone into detail with hunters, that, well, contrary to popular opinion, some classes may have actually had it a little bit better off in 1.1 than in 1.12. And you mentioned something about paladins in terms of illumination. And can you go into a bit more detail about that?
Sure. So sort of the main reason why paladins are considered to be, a very, very good healer is because they're very mana efficient. But the reason why they're very mana efficient, especially later in the game, has to do with a talent called illumination. And what illumination does is, on spell crit, which includes, flash of light, holy light, they refund 100% of the cost. So it's a free spell. So obviously you want to be stacking, a bunch of spell crit, on your paladin. And so that's really what is the core talent of the paladin. If there's one talent you need to be a healing paladin, is illumination. And even in 1.1, they have illumination. Even in the first patch of the game, they actually have it, lowered down the talent tree, so it's even easier to access. So, just to clarify on that point, it is true, as, Marky Mark said, that, the priests are better than paladins in 1.1, but he was sort of implying it had to do with the talent changes. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the fact that, the great itemization that paladins get simply isn't in the game in 1.1. But, if it weren't for the item, it's not a problem with their talents, it's a problem with the itemization that's available to them for why they're much weaker. And so if you're imagining some, hypothetical world in which we keep all the balance 1.1 and we go all the way through 1.12, they would still be incredible in 1.12 because they have illumination. That's all you really need. And then they have everything else, of course, which is great. But illumination is the core for them healing.
All right. Well, you mentioned, just earlier, that key word of normalization, and we'll take the opportunity now to explore this a little bit further. And you made an interesting note where you said that, and the part that raised my eyebrow was where you said that the answer that Mark gave when I asked him about this, was something that you're actually seemingly quite used to, because Blizzard has been, by the sound of the way you put it, somewhat dismissive in terms of not really going into detail about how normalization works. So how would you explain it for the layman in terms of how vanilla approaches the way in which normalization is calculated? Right.
So basically, when you do an attack, the damage comes from, you can think of it as two sources. The first is like the actual damage, which is like on the label of the weapon. So, you imagine some weapon which says something like deals 50 to 100 damage, right? So that's the first source of damage. And then the second source of the damage is your bonus damage. And the bonus damage comes from your attack power. So, when you open the character pane, you see his attack power, and it's like this big number, and then you mouse over it, and it says increases your DPS by like 67.3. It can seem very, very mysterious at first, when you look at it, but it's actually pretty easy to understand. So the numbers are pretty simple. Every 14 attack power gives you 1 additional DPS. So, imagine a world where you have 140 attack power. Okay. That's 10 additional DPS. That's DPS, damage per second. So you go, okay, well, that's damage per second. How does that swing, with my attack, right? My attack attacks once every 3 seconds. What does it mean to add 10 DPS to that? Well, all you do is you multiply that DPS number by the attack speed of the weapon. So if you have a weapon that attacks, once every second, okay, well, my weapon attacks once every second and my attack power is giving me 10 bonus DPS. Okay, 10 bonus damage per second. I attack once per second. Okay, it's 10 bonus damage per swing. 10 times 1 equals 10. Now you imagine a weapon that attacks every 5 seconds. There's no such weapon in the game, but imagine a weapon that attacks that slowly. Well, okay, I'm getting 10 bonus DPS and I attack once every 5 seconds. Okay, 5 times 10 equals 50. So I'll get 50 bonus damage on the next swing. So as you can see, when you have, one weapon that attacks much slower than another weapon, it's going to get a bunch more damage, bonus from your attack power. And so like, let's look at like real numbers, for example. Warrior very easily, even like in, tier 1 is going to have, not wearing the tier gear, but, Molten Core, or, going to BWL, is going to have something like, 1,400 AP, which is very easy to calculate. That's equal to basically 100 extra DPS, or 100 bonus DPS. So if you have a weapon that attacks every 1 second, then you're gonna get 100 extra damage per swing. And if you have a very, very slow weapon, like a weapon that attacks once every 4 seconds, like Arcanite Reaper is a 3.8, for example, well, then that's going to get you close to 400 bonus damage per swing. And the calculation is very simple. Multiply the bonus DPS by the weapon's attack speed. So the bonus DPS is 100. Multiply it by the weapon's attack speed, which is 4. Okay, 400 bonus damage on your next swing. So Blizzard saw this and they realized this was an issue because you have all these instant attacks, right? And so when you attack instantly, you get this huge bonus because you go, okay, well, I'm attacking instantly. And although this weapon's like base damage might be lower or its DPS overall might be lower, because it attacks so much slower, it's getting a lot more bonus damage per hit, from my bonus attack power. And so all of a sudden, this weapon, which is supposed to be way shittier than this other one, but attacks way, way slower, is actually going to do a lot more damage on the instant attack simply because of the bonus damage from AP. So the way that Blizzard tried to combat this was something called normalisation. And so what normalisation does is it makes the number that's used for your instant attack, it basically pretends that the weapon attacks at that attack speed, right? So for a two-handed weapon, it pretends that all two-handed weapons actually have a 3.3 attack speed. So now you imagine, your weapon that attacks once a second. Well, instead of getting 100 bonus damage on that instant attack, because, again, it attacks once every second. Well, now we're pretending that weapon actually attacks at 3.3 speed. So now all of a sudden, instead of getting 100 bonus damage, it's going to get 330 bonus damage. 3.3, times 100. So that's a huge buff to weapons that attack faster than 3.3. But conversely, it's a big nerf to weapons that attack slower than 3.3. So again, imagine your Arcanite Reaper, which attacks at a 3.8, or, the Nicker, which is a 3.9, or other weapons like that. Well, all of a sudden, normalization is actually going to reduce the damage they're doing. Because instead of getting, like, say, on a 4.0 weapon, instead of getting 400 bonus damage on an instant attack, you're only getting 330 bonus damage on instant attack because we're pretending the weapon attacks at 3.3 speed for the purposes of calculating how much bonus damage you get from AP instead of its actual attack speed, which is 4. I hope that makes sense.
It will when I listen to it for the 4th time, but thank you. I mean, I am just being blown away by everything you're saying. That is fantastic information. You've gone like full Frank the Tank in Old School. Are you familiar with that movie?
Well, yeah.
When he's in the debate and he takes the deep breath and he goes, recent research has shown the empirical evidence for globalization of corporate innovation is very limited, blah, 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 blah. And I am loving it.
Don't worry, there's no streaking coming. It's all good.
Well, look, thanks so much for going through all of that. And I feel like we could go on a lot longer, but I do want to keep this to a relatively shorter call, or short for Countdown to Classic being under the half-hour mark. But look, you've given some great notes from that latest episode. The one thing, again, you just dropped the ball a little bit, Fred Munro, because you didn't clarify what your favorite Mariah Carey song was.
Oh man, whenever I think of Mariah Carey, I just remember that video from like last year where her background music didn't come in. Remember when she was like singing for Christmas or New Year's or anything, and she's just like complaining anyway. But no, thank you again really so much for having me on.
My absolute pleasure, mate. And look, I will talk to you definitely off mic, and we will sort something out. I'm hopeful that the listeners enjoyed that call as much as I did. You're clearly someone who, as we technically say, knows his shit about Vanilla World of Warcraft. So thanks so much, and we'll speak to you again in the future.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, we've got another caller on the line now, and who are we speaking with, and where are you calling from?
Hey, my name's Prism, and I'm calling from Seattle, Washington, in the United States.
Thanks so much for calling in, Prism. And you obviously emailed me earlier in the week, and for the listeners' benefit, this is going to be a call all about dueling. And you mentioned in your email that you obviously were quite the fan of dueling, and you spent a shitload of time doing it. Is that right? What can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, I spent way too much time dueling. It kind of started out as a way to kill time in between battleground queues. Back in retail vanilla, there would usually be dead times because the servers were regional. You didn't have other time zones populating the queues, you know. Right now on private servers, they only have 1 or 2 servers for the entire world. Whereas back in retail vanilla, it was only your specific time zone. So late at night, if you wanted to PvP, you know, world PvP is going to be pretty dead. There weren't enough people to get a battleground queue to pop. And so, what ended up happening is the only PvP I could find really was dueling out in front of Orgrimmar. I played Horde back then. And it really turned into this amazing tool, that I'm still very much in love with. And I still spend way too much time doing it.
So what class were you mucking around with the most as a dueler outside of Orgrimmar?
Well, back in retail vanilla, I mained a mage. That was my first and only character that I got to 60.
And after all the hours and the time that you spent putting into dueling, did you, I presume, become pretty handy? You must have backed yourself in many fights.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that I took pride in back then is that no Horde mages knew how to kill Shaman, because they never had to deal with them. And Shaman were just notorious for destroying casters with their earth shocks, interrupting casts, and grounding totems. It's very difficult to get a cast off. But because I'd spent so much time dueling them, I was able to find, you know, a little kind of sequence that I could use to get the fight under control and then burst them down.
Now, you also mentioned that since the vanilla days, you've rolled a hunter, I'm presuming on a private server somewhere, and you've spent again hundreds of hours dueling with a hunter. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Back in retail vanilla, I had a 29 twink hunter, and that I always loved the class, just the run and gun style and the amount of burst damage that they could put out when they got a couple of crits. And, I don't know, it really appealed to me. And one of the challenges though is that I didn't have access to a max level hunter. And, I ended up raiding, through BWL in retail vanilla. I was also in the military at the time. So I was constantly getting deployed and having to take breaks. So I couldn't level another character to 60, but I always wished that I had access to a max level hunter. And thanks to the magic of private servers, I was able to test out a variety of classes at max level on instant 60 realms. And that's where, that sort of missed connection of, you know, the hunter class and I were able to finally reunite. And, it's really been a love story ever since.
Now, you talk about your experience with private servers, and you mentioned something before with time difference or time zones, really. And have you found that through your experiences in private servers that obviously there are more people online 24/7, and with more people being around you at any given time, have you still found that despite that, you prefer to eschew battlegrounds for dueling?
You know, if that is the case in certain situations. There's players who, you know, they're just really good, interesting players to duel. Something that happens when you duel someone for a long period of time is that you go through stages of establishing a meta for that particular matchup. And a meta is the most effective tactic available. So there's going to be a particular sequence of skills that your opponent is eventually not going to be able to counter. And what happens when you duel someone for a long period of time is that meta will start to adapt, because they will see, okay, I know that he's going to cast abilities 1, 2, 3. So when he goes to a cast ability number 2, I'm going to do this to counter it, and then I'll be able to get an advantage. And specifically in those long duel sessions, that really starts to evolve, and you get into all these really deep mind games where you're trying to, you know, predict what they're going to do, and then you have to predict what they're predicting so you can do something else. And it's really enjoyable. So yeah, now that I've been able to kind of taste all the different aspects of PvP, dueling is my favorite. I still enjoy a good battleground, but dueling is definitely my thing.
It's something that I'm fascinated by, because there's a certain mindset to it. I'm sure you would agree. And there are players that gravitate towards dueling. There are players that don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I'm one of the latter, and it's not because I have any particular distaste for dueling. It's just that if I'm going to get my hands dirty, I just I like the mayhem of a battleground. Now, I can honestly tell you, I think I have accepted a duel maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. I just don't get into it at all. And I've never initiated one. I'm weird that way. But in saying that, I would love to sort of try it a bit more when Classic drops. But my question for you is, do you find that you obviously don't get caught up in any kind of monotony with dueling, that you're doing it to push yourself and find new little fun ways to tinker with your class and ways to get around other classes the whole time?
So what I mentioned just a little bit ago about a meta, there's going to be kind of a set sequence of abilities that you're going to use on your character to win a 1v1 matchup against a particular class. And quite frankly, there's going to be a lot of players that just don't know how to deal with somebody who has a fairly, well-designed strategy to beat them 1v1. They're just not going to be able to beat it. So a lot of the times when I'm dueling players, I run into those situations where I have a pretty basic strategy and they just don't know how to counter it or deal with it. And in most of those cases, I just enjoy using it as a vehicle for connecting with people and building relationships and sharing information. So I'll go through and actually teach them, hey, you're opening in this particular way. So here's some other variations that you could try to, keep me off guard. Here's some other items that you could use to be able to counter my abilities, and things like that.
All right. Now, I should have prefaced the call with this. I must say, with my accent, I do realize how ridiculous it sounds when I say the word dueling at times, because we get the old joke. It sounds like you're talking about a duel, Jewel. But yeah. I've been trying my best to say the dueling, but everyone knows what we're talking about, so it's all good. But when you are dueling, I should say, is there anyone, and I know you said you've done the hunter thing, you've done the mage thing, are there any 1 or 2 classes that, no matter who you're playing, really give you the shits in a duel?
Well, I mean, kind of
shamans, obviously, as well.
Yeah, shamans are great. I think kind of the 2 that stand out for pretty much everybody are going to be Soul Link Warlocks and Shadow Priests. They're just really tough for everyone because they have so much raw power to the class. There's there's a number of different aspects that all contribute to how powerful a player and a character are going to be at max level. And some of those factors are going to be how well they scale with gear, the skill ceiling of that class, and then just the raw power. And I really feel like Shadow Priests and SL Warlocks just have an enormous amount of raw power. And, as long as you just like hit 3 buttons, you're going to do really well in most fights. Now, that said, having access to a lot of raw power, either from gear or from your class, tends to build in a lot of bad habits. And I know I'm guilty of this as well. Having access to a character with really great gear, I start to get lazy and I don't put as much effort into using all the little tricks and things like that. I'll just use my kind of basic rotation. So, kind of the built-in disadvantage for players playing those really strong classes like, the elemental shamans, the shadow priests, the SL warlocks, is that if you are able to put together, a strategy that can give you an advantage and lead to a win, most of those players are not going to know how to deal with it because 99% of the time they don't have to. They're just going to steamroll people.
Now, you mentioned to me that you have great plans for the future. I'm not sure if it's around the time when Classic drops or before then, that on your YouTube channel, you wanted to start posting detailed one-on-one guides for every hunter matchup against every class. That's something, obviously a big project you're going to undertake?
Yeah, and I've already started recording. One of the things that I want to do, I had a number of people actually complain about, well, you're using a character with best in slot gear. So what I did is on an Instant 60 server, because unfortunately I'm not the spry young buck I used to be. I have a day job and I have a son and a number of other responsibilities, so I can't level on a 1x realm. But anyways, on an Instant 60 realm, I have 2 hunters now, one with the best gear available in the game and another one with only blue gear that can be acquired pre-raid, so no raiding gear whatsoever. And I want to take both of those hunters through those matchups so that people can see what matchups looks like with the best gear available and also what matchups look like when you have very, very little gear available.
All right. Well, give yourself a plug. Don't be shy. Where can people find your YouTube channel?
Oh, thank you. Freezing Trap is my YouTube channel. I don't stream. This really is just a passion project for me. I really love vanilla World of Warcraft, and I just want to share the things that I've learned to try and help other people out.
Fair enough. Well, obviously, if anyone is a mad dueler, then please look out for your work over at YouTube there. But one other thing I'll ask is that you mentioned in your email that piqued my interest. You said that you also just happen to have a lot of stories in general from retail vanilla. So I'll ask you, what's your number one? Can you think of one straight off the top of the bat that just goes, yeah, this is a pretty memorable story from back in the vanilla days?
Well, I mean, World PvP, everybody talks about it, and I absolutely loved it. Leveling through Stranglethorn Vale is one of my favorite zones just because there was so much of it. But one particular fight on my hunter in vanilla, after I'd gotten him past the 20 to 29 twink bracket. And back then having a twink just meant that like you had a couple blue items. It's nothing like twinking today. But I ended up finding this, so I think I was maybe like level 32-ish on my hunter, and I found some double question warrior who came out and was trying to bully me. And I was able to scatter him, use my trinket, get away. And one of the things that's so powerful about hunters is that you have Aspect of the Cheetah, which lets you run 30% faster. However, if you get hit or take any non-periodic damage, you get dazed. So it's kind of a risk and reward thing. And in addition, hunters have such long range that you can outrange other people's abilities, like a warrior's intercept. Your ranged attacks have longer range than the max range on their intercept. So they literally just can't do anything. And I ended up just kiting this warrior for probably like a good 5 or 10 minutes because I ended up running out of mana and just trying to auto shot him and do that. He just like turned and 2-shot my pet. I had no idea what level he was. I knew he was, in his 40s at least. So he had a mount, and I didn't want him to get out of combat to mount up. but I ended up just grinding him down and finally killing him.
Very good. Now, just to finish up the call, in terms of your plans for World of Warcraft Classic, is it going to be the case that people can expect to find you parked outside of Orgrimmar, dueling away for hours on end?
I sure hope so. I don't know if that'll be the case. Like I said, leveling to 60 is quite a great feat. And I tend to get very distracted. One of my other hobbies is making money and playing the auction house. Mm-hmm. So that tends to distract me quite a bit. So, but hopefully I'll get there. And if I do, I promise that's where you'll find me.
Can you yell out your one secret item that you love to trade on the auction house that nobody knows about but you? Or you want to keep it tight to the chest?
Oh, shoot. There's a few. So Party Pooper mentioned some of my secrets already, but
he blew it up.
I'll reuse one of his secrets, but it's the free action potion recipe from the alchemy vendor. Yep. There's one in Darnassus and one in Orgrimmar. Mm-hmm. There's also 2 other recipes that are sold from that vendor. One of them is a little bit more. It's the superior mana potion recipe. Again, you can just camp an alt at that, and any time that you've got some downtime, or when you first log in, when you log out, just pop on your alt, check the vendor. I mean, the amount of money that you make off of that is just silly.
The free action potion recipe was definitely something that stuck in my mind after that long chat with Party Pooper, and a lot of people have gotten back to me about that one, saying like, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize the free action potion recipe. That's a really good idea." So it struck a chord with a number of people. So it's great to get that reminder in. Well, look, I must say, look, if you ever think of any of those stories from back in the day, I'd love to have you call in again another time. And God, with that bloody silky smooth voice you've got, you definitely have to call in more often. I'm sure people have enjoyed it. So we'll be in touch. Thanks so much for calling in and taking out the time for Countdown to Classic.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Josh.
All right, we've got a very special caller on the line now. And who are we speaking with, and where in the world are you calling from?
My name is Rick. I'm calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is actually funny because I think you just had someone from Pittsburgh on here, so you kind of have a decent little...
Yeah, there's been a few callers definitely from Pennsylvania. I think, obviously, one of Def Camp or Melderon called in recently, and one of them is from Pennsylvania, I believe. And we get people from all over the states, which is fantastic. It's great. And I get my little stats back, every week that says that people in every state are listening to Countdown, which is fantastic. But Rick, the reason why you're a very special caller is, if the listeners aren't aware, Countdown to Classic, hopefully by the time you've heard this call, has uploaded a new logo for the show. And if you've been in the Countdown to Classic Discord, which I can't recommend enough that you all jump into and join, because you'll be privy to conversations like this, I have been going back and forth with a few of the fans of the show, getting their ideas on some of the concept art for the new logo. And it's helped me, even though I've very much so had my preferences, it helps to hear from the fans as well. And we've decided on a great design by Rick. And Rick, first and foremost, let me say thank you so much for the design. It looks fantastic. And just tell us a little bit about what your thoughts were going through that design.
It was obviously just a blast to work on. It was also really nice that, I think I emailed to you when we were going back and forth about what we wanted, that you had a pretty clear idea of, what you were looking for. Because I've done multiple different designs for people, and the worst thing is having a customer not know what they want, but they'll know when they see it, kind of deal. So obviously the fact that you knew what you wanted, we kind of narrowed into it pretty quick, and it went really smooth.
Now, we were obviously hampered by the fact, and if anyone's wondering about the way in which the design came about, it would be everyone's dream, I'm sure, just to do a classic Blizzard design. And you showed me some concept art that you had drawn up. One was a paladin in his judgment set, which looked unbelievable. And there was a great warrior as well. And, you know, I would have loved to have done those kinds of things for the logo, but we're just so restricted by obviously the legalities of Blizzard IP and not wanting to step on any toes there. So I said to you, I gave you the basic instruction of, hey, I want a Warcraft feel, but we can't use any armor sets or anything from the game. And obviously you came up with a design that just hit the nail on the head. Do you tell people a little bit about your experience with tinkering with Warcraft art?
Well, I think this was the first thing that I did professionally. I mean, I tinker with things on my own and just create artwork, whether it's landscapes or character design, things like that. But yeah, I think we really hit the nail on the head when it came to capturing the World of Warcraft feel, because World of Warcraft kind of has a cartoon feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really serious. So, you know, with the colors we picked and having like a classic kind of like spike look armor, it really gives it that Warcraft feel. But again, it's completely disconnected from the franchise. So it worked out pretty well.
Just going on from, you mentioned that you haven't done this on a professional basis yet, but it's just something you play with in your own time. And I can tell you from what I've seen, you should definitely consider it because I think your designs are fantastic. But just tell people obviously a little bit about your background in terms of playing in the game and then exploring your creativeness outside of the game when you're not playing.
Basically, I started playing World of Warcraft when I was 12, because I started playing when Burning Crusade first launched, which was 2007, I think. But anyways, I started playing it, and my first character was a Night Elf warrior. And I remember when I first went out and got in game, I was just blown away because the only game I really played previously that was like open world like that was Ocarina of Time. And the fact that I could go in and explore this whole game, you know, amazing landscapes, it really sparked something in me that, you know, kind of just led me down the path to where I am now.
So when you were, a 12-year-old getting involved in the game, have you always have a bit of an artist's flair? Have you always sat down and sort of just doodled things or sketched things out?
I mean, I definitely was a kid that drew in class and stuff like that. Whenever I was playing, I was the type of guy that would like just walk up to a tree in game and just zoom in on my camera and be like, oh wow, look at the texture on this thing. It's crazy. So it was pretty weird. You know, like I said in the emails, I was like, a lot of people fall in love with the gameplay, the PvP aspects of the game, but a lot of my time in game was just flying around and taking screenshots of like places I thought looked really cool.
Well, on that point, when you say you might take a little bit of, time to appreciate the little things in the game, are there any particular vistas or characters or things that you have really loved to draw over the years? What do you find yourself keep coming back to?
As far as like in the World of Warcraft universe?
Yeah. Is there a particular character or place that you really love to sketch out?
The first thing I really started dabbling with, and maybe it's because I made a Night Elf character, was I loved drawing the Night Elf architecture. Just Darnassus in general was just blew me away. Some concept art of Teldrassil and things like that. So I do often find myself going back to which is interesting.
And do you sort of, it's something that I've only just gotten into recently, and I must preface this with the following information about me. I can't draw a stick figure. Like, I am the least creative person with a sketch of all time. And it's funny how the amount of people that I bump into that are like me that say like, yeah, we can't draw for shit. And it really makes me appreciate people that have the kind of talent that you do, just to be able to sort of get into the detail that you do. But do you find yourself venturing online and just seeking out a lot of art just to appreciate outside of what you create?
Oh, absolutely. I remember it was when we purchased Wrath of the Lich King, he got the battle chest, and one of the goodies you get in that is a booklet that has a lot of the concept art in it. And that was just kind of another thing that sparked my interest. I remember flipping through those pages and looking at all this different artwork and stuff like that. So that led me to looking up different concept artists online and finding people like Noah Bradley and all these different kind of artists that create just these amazing works. And then I think it was when I turned 16, I got Photoshop as a gift. And that's when I started to create my own work.
And is it just sort of Warcraft related stuff that you have worked on in the past, or what else do you dabble with, or what other inspirations from pop culture do you look towards?
I think any video game in general, really, that I find interesting. I also do a lot of realism paintings, just doing taking a photograph in the real world and then taking that onto my computer and trying to paint something it or getting inspired by it. So basically anything.
You mentioned one of the Blizzard artists, I believe, before. In the sort of non-Blizzard staff category, are there any people that you recommend listeners check out for some amazing Warcraft art, whether it be on Twitter or just on a website or anything? Are there any people that you look up to and think like, wow, this person is number one?
I think Noah Bradley, I'm not sure what his background is, but I know that every amazing piece of like concept art that I see is something he's done. He uses color in an amazing way. So he's definitely someone to look at if you're interested in learning about it. I know there's a person that runs a YouTube channel. I think he actually runs a school called I can't remember his name. It escapes me right now. But anyways, there's a lot of sources on YouTube and stuff like that. But as far as people go, I definitely would consider Noah Bradley a really big inspiration for myself.
Is Noah Bradley, does he work for Blizzard or not?
Oh, but I know he's worked on multiple different, I believe he's just freelance and he works on multiple different games.
Okay. Outside of that, do you sort of read comics or anything like that? Do you have any favorite artists in that realm?
So, I actually wasn't a comic book person, but, mainly my inspiration did come from things like Lord of the Rings and in different video games.
Right. Well, we talk about style. I mean, certain people in art styles that leap out to me, I believe it's, is it Akira Toriyama that obviously does, the Dragon Ball, series and also, Dragon Quest, I believe, styles like that really speak to me. And also you've got people like, Mr. Armano, who does the Final Fantasy designs as well, which are obviously incredibly famous pieces. Do you gravitate towards people like that, and have you sort of ever wanted to emulate other people, or do you really just go for your own style?
Started out like leaning towards other people's work because you get inspired by it, and Final Fantasy was another big one. I really enjoy ages, medieval type of feel. I think that kind of, helped me fall in love with World of Warcraft in the first place. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say. All
right, Rick. Well, look, thank you so much for calling in and thank you for giving us a little bit of, your input basically to Countdown to Classic. It's going to be there for some time. It's your design. I'm so proud to put it up as a representation of the show. And I hope every time you download and listen to the show, you'll obviously get a kick out of seeing your work there. So from the community, please let me extend my great thanks so much for putting in the work for the show.
Absolutely. It was an absolute joy to work on with you.
And that's everything from the listeners for today. Thanks so much yet again to everyone who called in recently. I love chatting with all of you, and I know that there are many more of you lining up to come and have your say on Countdown to Classic. I can assure you, I'm trying my hardest to get to all of you when I can. The time differences and real life obligations can get in the way at times though, so please do have a bit of patience with me. If you've already written in, please don't be shy in messaging me again to remind me if I haven't gotten back to you in a little while. I can assure you it's not personal, it just may be due to my terrible memory. But I'm all out of stocked calls for now, so please do reach out to me if you have a short topic that you'd like to chat about that perhaps the show hasn't covered yet and that you'd be happy to call in for about 10 to 15 minutes on. But for now, let's get stuck into it with a quick bit of anger with this week's Anger Management. In anger management, we go through the listeners' angriest thoughts about vanilla World of Warcraft. And today, we have Countdown to Classic legend Minoru, who tells us this. Look, I get it. Vanilla World of Warcraft was a continuously evolving product that went through balancing issues, leading to flavor of the month situations where some classes were strong and some were comparatively weak. It just so happened that the 1.12 patch led to warriors being the quote-unquote kings of vanilla. Should Blizzard keep it that way for Classic? So be it. I'm fine with that. Most warriors are cool. Warriors who love to tank especially so. What gets under my skin are the warriors who hide behind the excuse that they deserve to be at the top of the food chain at max level just because they have a hard time leveling. They call it vanilla's way of balancing the classes. It sounds ridiculous to me. I had a hard time for a couple of weeks and now I get to be strong forever. You can see the numbers yourself from Warcraft census data from the Internet Archives. Warriors were just as numerous as rogues and hunters at level 60 during vanilla. Warriors are not special for making it through the leveling curve. I'll say it again. Most warriors are great and deserve the love they get. It's just the haughty fools who think they deserve the top DPS spot on a silver platter that get the bad rap. Well, with that anger management out of our system, now it's time for Memory Lane. In Memory Lane, the Countdown to Classic listeners regale us with tales of their fondest or funniest memories from the vanilla World of Warcraft days. So we start with listener Ed Sheeran, and I hope that's the real Ed if you're listening, and they say this. So, I was 9 when World of Warcraft came out, and I had no idea what I was doing at any step in the game all the way to 60. I played a dwarf paladin named Ronor on the server Windrunner US. I leveled as Retribution and refused to ever use Seal of Command or Seal of the Crusader. Why? Because adding more damage to every single auto attack is obviously better than sometimes doing more damage, Seal of Command, or doing less damage with every attack, Seal of the Crusader, right? Yeah, fuck you guys. I was totally right. Nobody was going to tell me otherwise. Needless to say, I was a clueless and awestruck kid in a virtual candy store. Every level I gained brought me closer to the next zone I could go to and to unlocking the treasured memories created from the vast world of Warcraft. Fast forward to around level 48. I received word that Sentinel Hill in the Western Plaguelands is the place to be if you wanted to kill undead. I hopped on a griffin to South Shore, ran up to Chillwind Camp, followed the road until it forked, and I saw the spooky gates leading to tons of graves and a seemingly infinite supply of ghouls to slaughter. This was the first time since around level 30 in Duskwood that I was able to use the exorcism spell in excess. I was having the time of my life slaying undead and gaining those sweet, sweet experience points. One day I log on and see this mage just pelting a large group of undead with Blizzard, freezing them when they got close, then continuing to rain down icy death on them. When they all died, I just stared at the now drinking/eating mage. I asked him how on earth he was able to do that, and he walked me through the whole procedure, what each spell does, etc., etc. He even invited me to a group so that I could, help him, kill the mobs. I put on a shield and ran around gathering as many undead as possible, then bubbled as he began to blizzard all of them at the same time. Rinse and repeat. The days following, when I got some time to play, I would quickly open my friends list to see if my mage buddy was on to AoE farm some undead. Even when he out-leveled me, it was probably not worth it for him to AoE grind these mobs. He was still quick to hop on a griffin and make my day. The only sad part about this story, I don't remember his name. If you are out there, my unnamed mage buddy, I want to thank you for making my last stretch to 60 start with so much fun and macabre slaughter. If you remember helping out a noob ret paladin named Ronor on Windrunner, I would love to talk to you and see how you're doing. My second story is about Windlaw, the level 70 mage that I met in Nagrand when leveling my red pally through Burning Crusade. I first witnessed him killing those wind cyclone type mobs. He targeted a mob, casted combustion, and then two-shotted said mob with fireballs. Over and over again, I had never seen such power before. He saw me following him to watch and asked if I needed any help with quests. I said yeah, sure, and he proceeded to help me with virtually all the quests I had in my quest log. And it didn't stop there. Windlaw kept helping me long past that time that I hit 70, giving me tips and killing whatever I wanted to kill when we were online at the same time. Eventually, my brothers and I were forced to quit the game. Temporarily, of course. I played a ton during Wrath of the Lich King, Kata, and MOP. At the time, I thought it was going to be forever, and before I quit, I had to do something special for Windlaw, the best WoW buddy I ever had. So, naturally, I mailed him all of my gold. It was something over 1,000 gold, a large fortune to me, but only a small one by BC standards. And that was the last I ever heard of Windlaw. When I came back to play in subsequent expansions, I never saw his character back online. So again, Windlaw, if you are listening and you remember helping out a paladin named Renor on the Windrunner server during BC, I want to say thank you for all you did for me. And please do not hesitate to ask Josh for my info so we can get in touch. I miss you, buddy. Next we have this from listener Viv, who says this. Hello Josh and hello party people. I want to tell the story of meeting my best friend from Vanilla Mal'Ganis and some of the stuff that we did together. But Josh, I'm going to need you to read the next part in an old man voice. Back in my day when we had half the pixels you youngsters have, the first shiny new dungeon was added to the game. We played it on our giant CRT monitors and we liked it, goddammit. I hope that was okay for an old man voice. So yeah, anyway, Moradon was added to the game and it was this amazing multi-wing experience with some good loot. In one of my earliest runs of the dungeon, I was in a pug on my gnome mage, Revlon, and the healer was a paladin named Inhaber, which he later told me was German for owner. Since people used language and communicated like human beings back then, we were chatting away throughout the dungeon and goofing off, yelling things in /shout since we were in an instance where it wouldn't bother anyone. I don't remember what we yelled, but I do remember that it was all stupid stuff. We had so much fun running the dungeon that we ended up friend listing each other and running it like 1 billion times together until we got all the loot from it that we both wanted. After that, we played together constantly. Anytime there was something to do that could be done with others, like a group quest to get a key for a dungeon, an attunement quest, dungeon runs, tons of PvP, or whatever else, we practically always did it together. If he switched guilds, I would too. We were both sort of no-lifing the game back then, so we were always online. I'm pretty sure I hung out with him more than any of my offline friends or family in the couple of years that Vanilla existed. Once Dire Maul came out, we were on our way to the instance in Feralas one day when we passed by Camp Mohache, and we were in an endless battle versus what had to have been 10 to 20 horde. Somehow, we killed all of them by ourselves. Luckily, we didn't fight them all at the same time, but we were fighting several at a time and our resources were draining as more and more of them emerged. Nevertheless, we stood victorious and laughing at how crazy it was. It was the most epic world PvP battle I've ever had. Later, he ended up switching characters with someone else and started playing a druid named Crayon. It didn't really matter what he played because he was great at the game. At this point we were good friends and had exchanged phone numbers because he was going to call me whenever there was a world boss up so I could log on and help kill it. In hindsight, this was pointless for me to do because I was on dial-up and just lagged out whenever I fought a world boss. I was probably tempted by the purples. Regardless, one morning at 4 a.m. my phone started ringing. Half unconscious, I looked at my phone and saw that it was Crayon. If it was anyone else, I probably would have ignored it and went back to sleep. I answered. Hello, I mumbled. Azuragos is up. Log on and come. Oh, alright, give me a second. And that was the extent of the call. Any sensible person would not get up at 4 a.m. after only a few hours sleep to kill pixel dragons on the internet. But this was vanilla, dang it, and people weren't sensible. We wanted our purples and we'd lose sleep to get them. So I got up and lagged my way through the fight, then went back to bed. Good times. I wish that I still had my old phone. His number was stored on the phone itself and not on an SD card, and I've lost all contact with him. I have so many fond memories of hanging out with him, from the ones mentioned to all the memories of ranking in Battlegrounds, doing the Onyxia quest chain, and everything in between. In Haber, aka Crayon, if you ever hear this, I've been trying to get in contact with you for over a decade. I miss you, man. Hope you're doing well. You can find me on Countdown to Classic Discord under the name Viv. Hashtag free plug for you, Josh. Alright, thanks for listening everyone, and thanks for reading, Josh. Have yourselves a merry little Christmas or something. Thanks for that one, Viv. Next we have listener Mangan, who tells us this. After listening to the most recent episode about Scarab Lords, it reminded me of my experience getting the Black Karaji resonating crystal on private servers. I was able to obtain the legendary mount without completing the questline during the AQ war effort. To my knowledge, this was an exploit that was possible during the vanilla days, and I confirmed on the Lights Hope servers is still possible today. On Anathema, the old NOS server, I completed the Scepter questline during patch 1.9. I started the chain after the AQ gates had been opened, which made the grinding a little easier since I didn't have to grind the carapace fragments endlessly as Brood of Nosdormu rep is gained in AQ 40. Once completing the questline, you have a choice of 4 weapons, 2 swords and 2 daggers, and you get the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. This is the item used to bang the gong and open the AQ gates, but since the gates were already opened, it served as a testament to my hard work in completing this epic chain. For the next few months, it sat in my bank until the day patch 1.11 Nax Ramus launched. A guildmate mentioned that on retail vanilla, the AQ gates needed to be manually coded to be opened. When the server was brought down for patch updates, if the developers didn't manually set the doors to open again, the server would come back up with the gates closed. When the gates are closed, users are able to complete the Bang the Gong quest if they have the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. I took full advantage of this knowledge. When the server was brought online for patch 1.11, I was luckily in Tanaris and quickly grabbed my Scepter from the bank and hearthed to Silithus. I ran out to the gates and much to my surprise they were closed, with a small handful of people trying to get through them. Off in the distance I saw the yellow question mark near the gong, meaning that I had a quest to complete. I sprinted up to the top, completed the quest, and the mount was mine. The server was quickly brought down for maintenance and I was sure this item was going to get removed, but much to my surprise, I still had it in my inventory when I came back online. For my remaining time on the server, this was my most prized possession. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to openly flaunt it as it was not obtained legitimately. I kept it in my bags and would bring it out at special occasions. So if you're looking to do this questline in Classic, keep this tip in mind. Hashtag no changes. Next we have this one from listener Gannarin, who says this. One night I was chaining dire maul runs with one of my brothers and some of our close guild friends. The only thing we took seriously in the game was raiding, so any experiences we had outside of that was generally filled with comedic outbursts, general dicking around, and looking for ways to fuck with each other. One of our goals every time we played was to crack our friend John. He would constantly outburst with random noises, vulgar stories, humming the Bonanza TV show theme, etc., etc. He's a really funny guy that I still talk to occasionally, though neither of us play retail anymore. We would try to match his outbursts on Vent to get him to crack up, and that was usually good enough. But on this particular run through Dire Maul, after some hours of running the instance repeatedly, my brother ran ahead of the group on his mage. He was silent for a couple of minutes while we worked on some trash mobs. He resurfaced on Ventrilo by saying in this over-the-radio military voice, "Open the doors, I'm coming in hot!" He comes running back into the room we were in with some 20 elite ogres, trains them into the group, and wipes us intentionally. It was the first of countless times I heard John crying with laughter over Ventrilo, and that quote of my brother followed us all the way through Warlords of Draenor when we all eventually stepped away from the game. However, I will still occasionally call him and do the Jack Porkins scream from Star Wars for an easy laugh. And thank you so much for all of those memory lanes, everyone. Those are fantastic, and I really do enjoy reading them out and invite everyone else listening to please do feel free to send me through your memories as well. And now it's time for a bit of cleanup on the show. As you know, I invite listeners to correct me on anything I might have said or add something if you feel I didn't extrapolate enough on a point. So, we get the following from listener John G, who says this. Hey Josh, thanks so much for including my long memory lane story in this week's episode. I've been going through older episodes, which are still awesome by the way, and on episode 3 you told a player's story of scamming gold by wrapping pickaxes in wrapping paper and sending them for 50 gold COD to level 60 players. So, I thought I'd share my own vanilla scam, although I would argue mine was more like a scheme and not a bannable offense. This one is an auction house play and is a bit deceptive, but a surprisingly effective way to sell items for much more than the going rate. Technically, you can pull this off with any item that stacks to 20, as long as it's common enough to always have a regular supply on the auction house. In my case, I was doing this with wool cloth, and we'll use it as an example. First of all, there needs to be several stacks of 20 wool already up for sale. The more, the better, and you need to look for a run of them where 1 or 2 players have listed several stacks each for the same or similar buyout prices, preferably on the cheaper side as you want this to happen quickly. This is where it gets a little dirty. You then start listing your own wool, but list them in stacks of 2 instead of 20. You put the bid price just slightly higher than the existing seller's bid price, but put the buyout price exactly the same as theirs. I'm sure you're catching on now. Eventually, some player will come along needing a shit ton of wool, and we'll see the stacks of 20, all listed at the same price. We've all been there. You just spam that buyout button as quickly as you can to buy all the cheapest stacks as quickly as possible so you can get back to leveling your goddamn first aid. Then, of course, the buyer does not notice that the stacks have changed from 20 to 2 and keeps buying them anyways. I also suspect that wool cloth has an advantage here as the icon for it is just black and white, which makes the item count not stand out as much in contrast to the icon. So that's it. It may have been a bit shady, but arguably it's the buyer's responsibility to check what it is that they are buying and for what price. I'd love for you to call for other listeners to chime in with their money-making tricks too. All the best and keep it up, John. Next we have this one from listener Dakota, who says this. I've got a handful of questions for you, and no, I don't expect you to answer them, but would love to hear your thoughts. My favorite part of your show is the lore. I would really love to hear some more in-depth lore about characters and races and even events prior to vanilla. I know you already talk about key characters to current topics, but I would love to know more about lesser-known NPCs. I also hope you'll allow me 2 stupid questions because I have 2, sorry. First, what did you think of the Warcraft movie? I'm interested to know. And my second stupid question is, I'm often told I should look into radio or something of the like because I have a good voice. How would you suggest starting a podcast, and are there any good resources that you suggest? P.S. Can I get a shout out for Oracle from Texas? That's me. I love the show and I can't wait to hear more. Well, you've got your shout out, Oracle. Thank you so much for writing into the show and for listening. And I'll answer a few of your questions very quickly. Now, first and foremost, what did I think of the Warcraft movie? Well, funnily enough, we did a whole episode on it. Go back and listen to episode 15 and you'll hear myself and the 2 co-hosts of the Cinephiles, my other podcast, weighing in on all our thoughts on the Warcraft movie over an hour plus with that particular podcast, which was a bit of a mishmash between the Cinephiles and Countdown to Classic. It's a great listen, one of my favorite episodes, and you'll hear all my thoughts about the Warcraft movie in that particular episode. So go have a listen to that one. Now, in regards to the lore that you mentioned, I definitely want to do more lore, but I don't get every opportunity to do it that often. It does take a while to put together, but I love the lore as well, and Countdown to Classic will continue to try to do as much lore as we can. I'm not so sure about lesser known NPCs. I want to get the big guns out of the way first, but maybe one day we'll see what happens in the future. Finally, with regards to starting up a podcast, here's my greatest piece of advice. If you are thinking about starting up a podcast, here's my greatest piece of advice. Just do it. Seriously, use the Nike slogan as a great thing to drive yourself. Just jump in the deep end and do it. Pick a topic that is niche. That's probably a wonderful place to start. Don't necessarily just start like we did on the Cinephiles, a movie podcast or a TV podcast or a sports podcast. The more niche you get, the better. Pick a very, very small corner of the world that you particularly can bring a great viewpoint to and jump in and do that. If you are talking about broad topics, one thing I mean is Pick a way in which to deliver a very unique viewpoint on it. If you are talking movies, something that we did with the Cinephiles obviously was doing it slightly differently with our framework of the 7 deadly sins and using that to kind of discuss what is a very widely discussed topic. Do something different, have yourself stand out from the crowd, and just bloody start. That's the best way to do it. You'll learn on the go. That's what I did with Countdown to Classic. You'll hear the difference in quality from the show at the start to the show now. I hope you very much so learn on the go, and it is a wonderful learning experience. Just start, please. If you need any more advice, feel free to PM me, and I'm more than happy to help you out. But moving on to listener Thom Capital, who says this: I just joined your Discord a couple of days ago and we chatted briefly on the opening of AQ. I did listen to episode 10. It was very good for filling in the history on that event for me. I came across something from my own archives last night. Do you remember when/how/why priests got their face melting nickname? I think it was from this particular forum thread back in the day, which still cracks me up. And that listener linked me to an August 2005 forum thread over on the old official forums, and there was lots of "you will melt" faces in reply to someone asking how shadow priests go in PvP. And then they start saying the same phrase in different languages, and it was quite funny to go over, and I'll have to try and remember to put the link in the Discord at some point or in the show notes if I can. And my favorites were when people started saying things like "Vos mos melt visio et a umbra priest in PvP," and also "Fondelete la face come priest dell'ombra nel PvP." I really did enjoy that telling someone in Italian, "You'll melt faces as a priest in PvP." So that's a bit of fun. Finally, we get this one, or a chain of emails from Grayton, who starts this email with the topic, "A member of the Night Watch," and they say this: I just listened to episode 70 and I almost lost it when I heard John G's story near the end of the show. He mentioned the world PvP expeditions that gathered in a particular area, and then, with the leader's carousing speech and contagious spirit, we set out upon Azeroth to fulfill our mission. This was the Night Watch on the Venture Company server. I couldn't believe it. During the first part of the show, I thought how neat and quite unlikely it would be for me to run into any former friends in the way that Viv and Grush had. And then, there it was. My tiny corner of a game played by millions had been shared by someone else from the same time and the same place in the same little corner. Unbelievable. I felt like the odds of a meteorite hitting the ice cream off of my cone were more likely than my hearing this story. Carl Sagan would have lost his mind. I wasn't a terribly good player and I had a bit of an alcoholic problem, so I can't even remember which character I had in the guild. It could have been Grayton or Fetcher or Keocook or another toon I've forgotten entirely, but I remember being in the Night Watch. In addition to Jira, I believe at one point there was a leader or officer named Gronk, an orc rogue, but I might be confusing that with another memory. It was all so long ago. He was probably the kindest and ablest person I had met on World of Warcraft at that point. Altogether, they were wonderful memories, and I'm so glad that this podcast exists. I can't wait to jump back in when Classic comes around. Warm regards, Grayton. And I put this on to John G to obviously try and once again reunite some people, and John G got back to me and said this: "Hey Josh, that's so amazing. I never expected a reaction like that given how niche our guild felt. I'm not sure I remember him. That guild felt like a bit of a flash in the pan as I had joined it, but it ended so quickly, even though it may have been months. That's not long in World of Warcraft time. I'm sure he was probably there for some of the memories I have as well, especially if he remembers Jira. I believe my character's name at the time was Pyros, an undead rogue. I too was an alcoholic, but I do know my main at the time was this rogue. I feel like the guild leader was a paladin, being early TBC, but that could have been his wife. It's hard to remember. I think I remember her real life name, but wouldn't want to say it publicly given the circumstances that I talked about earlier. I would be down for a chat with him on the show, time permitting. Thanks again. This is so magical." Now, I've put those two in touch, and I really do hope that on the show we'll see if we can get yet another reunion, which would be really nice. We'll do it a bit shorter this time, but it'd be nice to put two people together again who played back in the day, and I'd love to see more Countdown to Classic success stories coming through with people finding their old friends through the show, and that really does warm my heart, so it's great to see. Now, that's everything really for the day, everyone. So just before I let you go, I just want to shout out to some very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. So shout out to Flozy B, Palfurus, Permadrunk, Rarebit, Romani, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support. And also, a big thank you to supporters Bossman764, Hurlbert, Good Kisser, Myrtlebanks, Purgatos81, and Zudamos, as always. That's it from me for the day, everyone. So signing off from Down Under. Have a great week, everyone.